When someone decides to start a new show, whether consciously or not, they're entering into a bit of an agreement. They're exchanging their time, focus, energy, and often money in the hope that what they watch will be enjoyable, fulfilling, and ultimately worth the commitment. Media analysis can go in a million different directions, but I think it always boils down to a single question. Was it worth the time? This becomes especially tricky when you find a story that takes a while to fully click. I've had plenty of shows I nearly gave up on that eventually became some of my absolute favorites. And last night, I finished season 1 of a new addition to that list. For years, people have been recommending Dungeon Meshi to me, also known as Delicious in Dungeon. It's been exploding in popularity lately and definitely feels like part of this new trend of old-school fantasy anime making a comeback. And honestly, I'm usually not drawn to this kind of fantasy. I tend to be a bit cautious with fantasy series because it's so easy for them to feel repetitive or overly complicated. But this one surprised me. You're watching Rollipop TV, and today we're diving into stories that take a little extra time to fully shine. It took me several tries to really get into Dungeon Meshi. There's a specific kind of magic and heart in this story that took its time to really hit me. I think part of my initial resistance came from how episodic the first stretch felt. Episodic anime has to be top tier to hold my attention. I usually prefer character-driven arcs that evolve, where people grow and events matter. Some shows hit that frustrating reset button every episode. I'm actually planning a whole video on that concept soon, about series that slowly morph from episodic to serialized in a way that's really satisfying. But for today, let's focus in on Dungeon Meshi. Its oddball cast, quirky style, and why I think this show deserves an audience willing to see it through. What first makes Dungeon Meshi stand out is its quirky, mismatched party. It follows a ragtag group of professional dungeon explorers who wind up in a desperate situation. In this world, dungeons are coated in a strange magical field that tethers souls to bodies, allowing certain mages to revive the dead. But there's a catch. You need the body to do it. And that's where our crew finds themselves. Half a team, barely funded, forced back into danger to rescue someone they lost. Their lack of resources leads to the show's signature twist: surviving off meals cooked from the monsters they slay. Hence, Delicious in Dungeon. What I love is that none of these characters are overpowered or instantly likable. They're flawed, awkward, and constantly stressed. A lot of anime try to make characters instantly appealing, but that can lead to flat, one-note personalities. Writers are taught that heroes should be likable up front, but sometimes that just means making them bland. Dungeon Meshi takes a different route. Its characters are messy, sometimes frustrating, but full of weird personality quirks that make them feel alive. And over time, that awkwardness turns into charm. Take Laios, the lead character, for example. He's socially awkward, bad at expressing himself, and just a little too obsessed with the monsters in the dungeon. But that doesn't stop him from genuinely trying to connect with his teammates. There's a recurring gag I love. Whenever they run into dog-like monsters, Laios goes full wild animal, growling and snarling to try to scare them off. It's goofy, totally in character, and it ties directly into the heart of the show's humor and premise. Dungeon Meshi constantly walks this fine line between funny and serious, blending the two in ways that enhance both sides. That's what really hooked me. The show grows over time. What starts off as a light-hearted cooking monsters adventure deepens into something much richer. Those weird quirks of the characters? They're not throwaway gags. They matter, they develop, and they pay off later. The eccentric dwarf who's a monster cuisine expert? That ties back into the story in meaningful ways. The magician elf who seems awkward in combat? Turns out there's a whole arc tied to that. Nothing is wasted. Everything loops back and enriches the overall narrative. What's cool about having a cast this weird is that they don't remind you of characters from other shows. They're unique. And I love when I find anime that do that. Characters that don't feel recycled from some other story I've seen. It's the same reason I enjoyed shows like Kaguya-sama or freiren so much. Characters I didn't immediately connect with won me over by the end. There's this old Brandon Sanderson quote about magic systems that I think applies to characters too. The limitations are often the most interesting part. What characters can't do, their flaws, that's where the real depth happens. And Dungeon Meshi leans into that beautifully. It's not just the characters either. Dungeon Meshi has a style that's both visually gorgeous and narratively distinct. It's not afraid to break the show don't tell rule when it works in the story's favor. The world feels grounded, but also fun and imaginative. The visuals balance between detailed beauty and expressive simplicity. And its color design? Subtle brilliance. It's the kind of quality you don't fully notice until you think back on what you've seen. And then you realize it's been consistently excellent the whole time. What I love most is that it feels fresh. Sure, I could compare it to other shows I enjoy, but none of them feel exactly like this. With a romance anime like Skip and Loafer, I can name several others that scratch the same itch. But Dungeon Meshi is its own thing. And that's exciting, not because it's flashy, but because it's unique in a way that sneaks up on you. So, if you've got ideas or thoughts you'd like me to cover, let me know. I've already got a list going, but I'm always open to more. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next week.